24, 27. People are joining rapidly. Welcome to our session titled Less Talk, More Action. We're talking about what it looks like to use SDGs on the ground and in the real world with local communities. 57. This is very, very fast. I am impressed. Thank you all for coming today. While you join, if you feel like sharing your video, we would love to see you and have you join us here today. So please feel free to turn that on. I'm also just going to launch a little poll while people join the meeting, just so that we can see where you're coming from and what your background is. Due to the limits of multiple choice, we've presented mostly continents in the option, but in the chat box, if you'd like to tell us which country you're in, we're also interested in that. Throughout this session, also please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. At the end of the session, we'll answer questions based on the most upvoted. So if you see a question and you think that's a great question, please vote on it, and then we will make sure that we ask the most interesting questions to the most people. We still have people coming in very quickly, 85 right now. Welcome everybody, no pressure. So I'll leave this poll going just for a few more seconds. And then we'll hear from our first presenter, who's Carlo Ahl. He's been working as a researcher at the Western Norway Research Institute since 1990. And for the last 3 years has headed the Norwegian Research Center on Sustainable Climate Change Adaptation. In addition, he holds a 20% position as professor in sustainable development at HVL, and he's worked with local sustainable development since 1988, when he first started as environmental officer in the small rural municipality of Ulen in the southern part of Hjorland. So we will now hear from him. Take it away.
Okay. Say okay when the screen is filled with my presentation.
Yep, looks great.
Fine. So I'm actually looking back now before we will be looking forward. And it's always important to see what we can learn from history. So my title is Looking Back and Learning from History, from Local Agenda 21 to Local SDGs. Nothing new under the sun, question mark. Sorry. So first, a very brief run through of the history of sort of pre-SDG local sustainability initiatives in Norway. So we have the UN background process, starting with the report Our Common Future and the launch of the goal and idea of a sustainable development. In '92, we had the first UN action plan on sustainable development, the Agenda 21, with this additional chapter 28 of Local Agenda 21, and the 2000 Millennium Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. And as a follow-up of that, there is this initiative called Local 2030, localizing the SDGs. So where does Norway place itself in this picture? We had an initial sort of traditional environmental policy kind of reform in the Norwegian abbreviation MIC reform from '88 to '97. So all municipalities were granted earmarked fundings for applying an environmental officer. And I was part of that program as a early career directly from a university, working for 2 years. And it ended in 1997, meaning that the earmarked funding was then retracted. This was a traditional resource environment kind of focus. It took some time before the Norwegian government acknowledged that Local Agenda 21 and sustainability was something different and more than just the traditional environmental policy thing. So, but finally, there was set up some kind of more project-related funding by the government, and it ended around 2000, a couple of years after. The municipalities started a little bit earlier, in fact, than the Ministry of Environment, and the first municipality to adopt a Local Agenda 21 plan was Sogndal, which happens to be the city where our research center is located, and Nordland County. So the regional Agenda 21 was also picked up. However, during in the early 2000, then sustainable development and local Agenda 21 sort of vanished, and climate policy took over as the heading for whatever local initiatives and planning processes taking place in municipalities dealing with environmental issues. And now many municipalities start to pick up the idea of SDG. And because of this sort of climate period that sort of blocks here, there's a tendency that many municipalities and actors involved in this local SDG work are not aware of the so to say pre-climate history of sustainable development. So what I will do now is to present some of the key learning points from the so to say pre-climate part of the history in local authorities in Norway, which I think will be very important for the future SDG work. First, should we choose the sort of the narrow sector approach or the very broad integration approach in order to create success? And this discussion has been crucial in environmental policy as well as in sustainable development policy since the start. And in Norway, it started in the 1970s. The discussion, should we have a Ministry of Environment at par with the Ministry of Finance, or as more of a sector ministry, and it ended up as the latter. The SDG sort of discourse is aimed at a very broad integration perspective, covering almost all aspects of politics, which could be a strengthening or it could be a weakening of the work. And there is no really good success recipe for this. The other very important discussion is, which I tried to capture in the green growth versus degrowth. The critics of economic growth from the 70s was deliberately left out of the Brundtland report for strategic reasons, citing Gro Harlem Brundtland. If that had been included, then the report would be thrown away. And therefore, these aspects really did not manage to enter into the sustainable development debate. But recent changes, for instance, which was open we'll hear about tomorrow, the donut economy. I think some of these more degrowth perspective is now sought to be re-entered into the sustainable development debate, and I think that's a very important new change in the sustainable development debate, and it's still remains to see if it's also possible to implement that at a local level. Democracy, a precondition for sustainable development. There's a very interesting story why on earth this sort of bottom-up initiative of including or adding an additional chapter 28 in the Agenda 21 document, why that's took place. And it's the sort of the strategy behind, or idea behind LA21 was to include a specific chapter on local initiative as a sort of a hidden or secret strategy to help creating democracy in non-democratic countries. And the idea was that democracy has to be created as a bottom-up process, or at least that also has to be taken, be part of both a democratic and, on the longer run, a sustainable development process. However, as it turned out, the LA21 took mostly place in Western democratic countries, but there are some very important exemptions from that. The local action, perhaps that also is a precondition for sustainable development. And I have a question mark here, because many studies indicate that local actions tend to be very narrow down to the local problems, like local pollutions and stuff like that, thus sort of forgetting the global and more diffuse part of the environment and sustainable development challenge. But at the same time, when you look closely to some of the sort of best practice and front-runner municipalities, you see that many of the very radical ideas first arise locally in these front-runner municipalities, and then before they hopefully spread upward to the national level. And one reason for that, of course, is that actors that are actively opposing sustainable development are best organized at the national level. I mean, the car industry doesn't have representatives in every municipality, so then radical, reducing car transportation initiatives have a better chance to sort of survive the local political process. And my last point, leaving as much time as possible open for questions, is this very important insight that local plus national is a success, whereas local without national will guarantee to be a failure. And what we saw in Norway and many other countries, that in countries with very sort of ambitious local Agenda 21 initiatives and many municipalities working with that, in many of those countries there were accompanying lack of an ambitious national Agenda 21 plan. So of course it's very limited what sort of radical local initiatives can really change the development without sufficient support from the national level. You saw some interesting examples in Norway, for instance, under the heading of sustainable consumption, that you have sort of alliance between radical elements at the national level and radical front-runner municipalities, and the national level wanted the municipalities to sort of pave the way and show how to proceed on these more radical issues. But when they got their experience and said, well, we need some national policy support, then sort of the dialogue ended. And as part of that, or as a result of that, the many interesting initiatives on sort of pointing to in direction of reducing consumption in rich, high-consuming countries stranded, and this technological fix kind of approach to environmental policy was not challenged by what some of these front-runner municipalities really wanted to happen. And all of these learning points, I think, is very important to bring into the local SDG debate, so we don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel and make this some of it negative experiences once again. So that was my input.
Zoe, your mic.
Yes, that will definitely help if I unmute my microphone. Thank you. And thank you, Carlo. That was a great presentation. Just for those of you joining in or who missed the beginning of the session, we're currently at 109 participants. Please put your questions in the Q&A box and then vote up on the ones that you are interested in hearing, and we'll take those all at the end of the session. Out of interest, the results from our poll are in, and about 80% of our attendees are from Scandinavia and 14% elsewhere in Europe. And then we have 42% early career scientists and students and 33% academic researchers, with the next group being industry, just so we know who is all here today. Up next, we'll hear from Åsa Christina Lundberg, who researches the use and protection of natural resources with a focus on legitimacy and conflict management in participatory processes at the the Norland Research Institute. Her current work deals with the implementation of SDGs in local and regional planning. So take it away.
Yes, unmuted. Okay, I hope you can see my screen now. Someone is nodding? Yeah, good. Okay, then I'll just click back. Thank you for the introduction, Zoe. And it's great to be here, to have the opportunity to talk to you all and to discuss afterwards. So I'm going to do the exactly thing as Carlo did, and I'm going to stick to my time. So you now heard sort of the historical glimpse. I'll take this sort of a more overall view of what is actually going on at the moment at local and regional level and in planning in relation to integrating the SDGs. And I just have to say before I start, because now I'm showing you my pen, I don't have it on. I put on a sweater for number SDG number 10 and 11. And I think that at least when I work with this issue, I think it's important to stress that my motivation for working academically with SDGs is to see that they're put into action and that they actually lead to something different. So different priorities leading us towards the Agenda 2030. And actually, 2/3 of the targets, they've been assessed that they can't be reached without action on local level by local actors. And so the local level is key here, and at the same time, the relationship between the local and national level, of course. So in Norway, planning has been pointed out as the tool to localize the SDGs. So here you see the national expectation that is sent out to municipalities and counties every 4th year from the government. It's a long list of what they expect of local and regional level in their planning. And planning in Norway, that's both societal overall planning and specific spatial planning, zoning plans. And the government stated that they expect municipalities and counties to base all of their planning on the SDGs. And the SDGs has been pointed out as the political, the overall ambition then for developing the society across different levels. And here you see a quote from a mapping that we've done, exploring what is the status in municipalities actively working with this in their planning. And you can see that it's between this big, it's between enthusiasm and that this is really frustrating. So having the goals, being part of something important, and at the same time having to localize them, having to translate them, having to putting them into action is a challenge. And even though then the government has said that they expect all the municipalities and counties to do this, there's no recipe for how to do it. And from my discussions with planners and practitioners, that's one of the frustrating things that's going on right now, and everyone's looking for good examples. But in reality, they might be that example for other municipalities and other organizations working with SDGs. And at the same time, having in mind that planning is already supposed to contribute to sustainable development. That's the objective of planning in Norway. So that's the backdrop. So we've surveyed all the municipalities, focusing then on planning, and asked them what is the status, what is happening on the ground working with SDGs. And then we've also looked further into 6 municipalities working with SDGs actively in their planning system, and 5 counties. And so at the end of last year, 2020, the work is still in early phase. The expectation to include this in planning came in 2019, so that's relatively new, but we see that the municipalities that's leading on, they've done it on their own initiative. So in Norway, we don't have a national plan yet. We're waiting for the white paper saying what's going to be the ambition level and the priorities, but some municipalities are leading ahead. But we see that the counties, they're lagging behind. And I think this is interesting and important to have in mind, because one of the targets in Sustainable Goal number 17 is to have a cohesion, to have across the different levels. So when you're lacking a part of that in the planning system, that has implications. We see that external expectation is really important. So the pressure from businesses, from civil society, but also that the work on the SDG are locally anchored in the collective level, but also at the political level. And then the question comes whether we're talking or meaning the same with SDGs, localizing them, but at least having the political ambition is crucial. And then a lot of municipalities are saying that they're lacking tools. They want specific tools, and some of them are pointing at indicators as one of the solutions that we finally can map how we're doing, while others say that it's easy. Well, there's a lot of things that we can't measure, and that already existing tools can be used in traditional planning. For example, we have different tools, different processes, different procedures available already, and that working with SDGs needs then to be implemented into that. So the last point here, and I think that's important, and when we talk about SDGs, it's a question of whether we're talking about SDGs as the sort of the overall goal with the nice colors, or whether we're getting into the targets, and then it really becomes messy. But that's where the work needs to be done, because we see that among those municipalities that have prioritized goals in their planning, and this relates to Carlos' point, whether it's sort of a broad encompassing approach to all of the targets, or whether it's better with a more narrow approach. You see that it's the goal 3 on health, 4 on education, 13 on climate action, and then 11 on sustainable cities and communities that are prioritized among the municipalities that say that they have selected goals. And then we find on the other end that that goal number 2 related to hunger, and 1 to poverty, that's sort of, they're omitted. They're not part of the overall planning when they have to prioritize. And of course, faced with 17 goals, 169 targets, that is what the municipalities seems to be doing. But I want to stress that across the 17 goals, there is a local dimension for each of them, and it's in the targets. That's why the targets are important. So what we are doing in our research project, where Carlo is responsible for the historical and having the really long lines, we're now developing a framework for working with SDGs. So some of you might have seen this before. It's from the local 2030 and the UN's resources online. But at the moment, we're working here. And following 7 municipalities and how they're relating and implementing the SDGs in their local planning. So raising awareness, I don't think we'll ever come away from that. We always have to get back to that, but still moving further and ending up in action. That is the goal as well. So what we've done is that we've worked with the 169 goals and actually condensed them down to 55 targets, and we worked in 2 different regional workshops on that in Nordland and Vestland, and we'll continue working on that in the municipalities that we have as partners in our project. But that is related to early stages planning processes, and I think one of the challenges that it's here. So that box is green. We need to get there. We need to get the SDGs into the plans, but that's not enough. So we need to put them out into action and then make them part of the different pathways that can lead to the Agenda 2030. And those pathways might be different depending on regional context and the local context. But still, if we're going to get the targets and the goals into action, it's important to not cherry pick, not to pick out just the ones, the goals the municipality is already working on, but also not to focus on specific targets, because I think what is vital here is to understand the interactions between the targets. And we'll develop this into a nice illustration when we've collected more of the experiences, but also to see whether the methods that we're using in workshops based on both scenarios and future visioning, whether that can be or how that can be made applicable in different contexts and in different planning levels and planning types. Because what I think the challenge is then to go from this overall perspective and the strategical level that the SDGs are at the moment and down to actually specific zoning plans. So here are some of the pictures from what we've been doing. As I've said, I think a really important reflection is that if you only stick at the overall goal level, you don't get your hands dirty. That's not where we need to put in the energy. It's in the targets, it's in the relationship between the targets, and especially the goal conflicts and the trade-offs that needs to be visualized between the targets, and that that there are methods, there are processes available for working with this, but still I think there's like getting together with practitioners and working as academics, but also with businesses in interaction between targets. That's vital. And not using the SDGs trying to find ourselves. What are our main interests and what kind of SDG does that correspond to? And at the same time, being aware that the ball is rolling. It's not. Politicians usually use a ball as an example of that they're picking it up and taking the challenge on. And the work on the SDGs at local and regional level in Norway at the moment, that's really, there's a lot of things happening, but having the momentum and at the same time being able to look at the national level and seeing how national politicians actually say that these are our ambitions and this is specifically what we expect of local and regional level. I think that still is missing. So I'm really looking forward to that white paper. Here, this is a picture from Bodø on a day with no fog and no wind, where everything's clear and it's possible to keep your eyes looking forward on 2030. There's a lot of work going on, and there's a lot of actually examples from local level and local processes that we'll continue discussing in this workshop. But I think it's important also to recognize that maybe, and Alf-Helge is going to present what Bømlo municipality is doing, maybe it's not possible to wait for others to be the example, but maybe what is important is to be the example for everyone else. It's difficult, but yeah. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Åsle Christina. I think that these Zoom webinars are great to bring us all together, but you kind of missed the gentle applause after a great presentation. So I'll just pass that on from everybody. Up next, we're going to hear briefly from Niels Tore Skogland, who is the True Sustainable Strategy Advisor at skogland.com and a partner in sustainonline.com. He's a visiting lecturer at the Norwegian Business School in Bergen and School of Architecture and Design at Falmouth University in the UK, as well as being the chairman of the Blue Ocean Norway and assistant governor of the Rotary International in Bergen. Very busy guy, so thank you for being here. We're now going to have some brief insight from you.
Thank you, Zoe, for the introduction, and thanks also Carlo and also for their presentations. First of all, while Carlo was working at the municipality in Ørland, me and some friends started up Young Friends of the Earth in Haugesund, which was a county next door. So I kind of been following this for quite some time, also seeing the challenges that has been happening, and a lot of the challenges I find is related to kind of taking parts of the problem and making that into like one universe, and then forgetting how this implements and get the understanding of how it affects other areas. So we have to move a little bit further on to talk about green growth or degrowth, and actually ask what do we give value to and what do we say doesn't have value? Because at the moment there is a lot of unsustainable businesses that are creating costs that hasn't been reflecting in their economies. And to also thank you very much for a good kick up on the need for strategies and actions, and really don't use the SDGs to find yourself. I mean, people that it's like, I'm number 13. No, I'm number 12. I mean, all of them has to be implemented within 2030. And I'll now tell you shortly how to do that. Because first of all, we need to understand that there are rules in nature which will decide whether we are a relevant species or we are an irrelevant species. And there has been done very interesting sustainability research work specifically from Carl-Henrik Robert and his research colleagues at the Blekinge Institute of Technology, which actually asked what are the causes for unsustainable behavior and how in the way we deal with materials, in structure, in nature, and also human needs. These rules need to be used for companies and societies to create a sustainable future that we need to be sure that we are aiming towards. And there create a strategy to get the things done towards how we adapt dealing and creating value also for nature, and not only making false value for our own companies or our own businesses. And in order to do that, we need to stop reducing problems into silos, where you only see climate or only see biodiversity or only see unfairness. You need to understand this as a whole and completely be a university, not only an institute. And we need to also start addressing the philosophical biases that science and topics are really struggling with. They can't see their own, how they need to change the concepts and the understanding. So philosophical biases and of course also confirmation biases are huge sustainable threats. This will be very important now also for companies when they are dealing with the EU taxonomy, because if you don't start creating truly sustainable products and services, you will have very expensive loans and the value of your stocks will be definitely reduced. And this is something that both owners and CEOs are starting to catch up with. So for universities, it's extremely important now to integrate natural and social research and promote knowledge and development that creates value both for nature, societies, and companies. So to get biological knowledge into all introduction courses for all students is extremely important. Sorry, there my minutes were out. Yeah, the list is long, but at the very end, I like to say, stop copying each other and start looking at nature, because we need to understand our surroundings in order to become a relevant species, and we should stop copying bad examples of our own species and the misjudgment that has been done previously. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great point. Very interesting. We're also going to add on to the topic with a comment from Alf-Helge Greke, who's an urban planner at Volmo municipality in Western Norway, who works with ongoing processes of implementation of the SDGs in their municipal planning. So take it away, Alf-Helge.
Thank you. Now I'm supposed to share this presentation with you. Do you see my presentation now? It's quite short.
It just needs to go into presenter view, but yes, we can see it.
There you go. This is just a short introduction. I'm going to read what's on the screen. Yes, as you said, I'm working as an urban planner, and we started quite early. It was a few years ago, like 3 years ago, by implementing the sustainable goals into our local plans. Now, at that time, it is still quite new for municipalities to do that, but we wanted to be as early as possible. I was reading about the quite large municipality of Asker and Bærum that were working with this. But we managed to have a finished plan with in 2019, where we had implemented the sustainable goals. However, the hardest part is still to come, and I have only one slide here. If you see to the upper left, you'll see the samfunnsdel, which is the what do you call it in English? I forgot it. Well, it's the master municipal plan, the social part of it, and we did work quite a lot with public participation when we were making this plan. That's an own lecture on its own. But more important, or as important, was that we wanted to include the newly elected local politicians, as you see in the next picture there. We had this conference in Bergen not too long, just a few weeks after the local elections. And we were talking about this, but we didn't make any priorities. We didn't have workshops on the sustainable goals because this was very new. We had to just present them, that there was actually something existing named United Nations Sustainable Goals, and we have a large and local responsibility. This is not something that United Nations or European Union can solve for us. We have to do it ourselves. Now, quite recently, we have been starting now with implementing and making a local awareness, at least in the administration of my municipality, as you see in one of the next pictures here, including the entire administration, actually. At least working with plants. And we made some priorities. We had a workshop together with Vestlandsforsk, which is also participating at this conference. Very good, and we only have the head management of the municipality. As you can see down to the left, at this conference we had with the politician, we just had quite a informal, we asked informal question, what is your main, what you think is most important for you as a local politician? Which one of the sustainable goals you think is the most important? And you had to put this small sticker on there. And you can see that sustainable goal number 8 and 3, which is good health, is quite remarkably, that was many local politicians found that very important. But we have a long way to go. These are just some examples of how we're now trying to implement the goals, but more important is how do we evaluate this, as also Christina was always talking about. How do we evaluate this? What indicators are we supposed to use? Because there's a huge knowledge gap there, needing a lot of research too, especially on the social path of the sustainable goals. So I have 2 examples down in the right, in the corner on your right-hand side. The issue is that we have locally big gender gaps in industry, where a lot of men in leading positions, and in health sector, where we have a lot of women in leading positions. But how do you value unpaid care and domestic work versus leadership and full employment? Both of them are sustainable goals. And locally, we have a lot of women working part-time completely. They do that voluntarily because they want to stay at home. There are plenty of reasons to that, but is there a conflict between sustainable goals? No national indicators or goals can give us that answer. We have to evaluate that ourselves. This is one of the local issues which could be quite challenging. The second example here in the blue square is Leve hele livet, and that's a major national quality reform for elderly, which the municipalities local level have the main responsibility of fulfilling. And so, and here we want to use that as a pilot case for integrating the sustainable goals in as completely as possible. But how do we secure and integrate social development goals to formal land use objectives? Which is because land use is very regulated by laws and restrictions. It's books and piles of books with restrictions on that. But how do you secure social issues in that? There are hardly any literature, no guidelines, hardly anything. We have to find this for ourselves. So my ambition now is we need to form and find our own tools and indicators quite quickly, because this is we can't wait for a local or a national white paper or guidelines. And this we also have to form this ourselves from the bottom up. So this is just a short presentation of how we are trying to implement and working on this. I could gladly share a lot more in workshops or in these informal meeting rooms afterwards. But this is just an example of like a municipality of Bømlo, the size of Bømlo, is quite challenging because we have very few others to compare ourselves with or to look at. And this counts for all of Norway, more than 300 municipalities, and many of them are quite small. They have a small staff, very small staff. So this is not to be underestimated. The capacity of the planning capacity is quite crucial. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alf-Helge. That was great to learn more about what's going on in your commune. This is the end of section 1 of our webinar. So all 115 of you who are listening in, this is a great chance to write some questions on the topics at hand. Again, a reminder, just because we are having people come in constantly, that will answer questions at the end of the session based on who has the most upvotes, which sounds terrible, and we don't like that about social media, but we do like that about webinars. So please interact with the questions, add your comments, be bold. We really want to hear from you. Even if your questions don't get answered, they still give us very valuable things to think about. So moving on to the next section of this panel, we'll hear from Dorothy Dankel from the University of Bergen about her work developing and localizing SDG thinking for communities, and her collaborator, Karen Berretsen, who's advisor to the Lovisa SDG project and the founder and principal of ART, which is a digital platform for dialogue and reporting on the SDGs. She has more than 30 years of wide-ranging global experience based on a master's degree in physics. We're looking forward to hearing from both of you. So off you go.
Thank you, Zoe. This is really, really exciting today on so many levels, but I really am happy with this workshop so far because I think this is going to flow really nicely. So I'm going to get into some of the topics that also Christina mentioned and try to kind of exemplify a little bit of how we're working. So I'm the project leader for this hashtag Lovisa SDG project. And I'm going to talk about a specific type of workshop setup that we have prototyped and tested now. This was part of my student Anna Bloma's Erasmus internship that she just finished about a week ago. So this is really fresh. I'm going to give some of this is anonymized because not all of our stakeholders that we worked with were ready to kind of publicize this type of thinking, which is totally fine. So of course we know the goals, and I'm glad that we've already started to talk about the 169 targets. I mean, this is just like a quarter of the targets because this is where the action is. And I guess I'm becoming kind of like this SDG snob where I'm like, okay, what's your favorite SDG? And I'm like, no, I think the way to reframe that question is what's your favorite sustainable activity? Because what we see is that when we look at the goals, it's kind of, you know, there's just too much going on. You want to understand the relevance of the targets. And this is what we're trying to do at the local level. So I'm going to get into our case study, but in general, we want to understand the local activities, and we do this by trying, you know, working with businesses and ask them, what are you doing? What's going on? What are your ambitions? And then try to look at which targets of the 169 are actually relevant to them. And then look at these clusters, because we are hypothesizing that when we put together these clusters of the targets related to the activity, then it'll be a lot easier for local communities to kind of get going. So all this is done in a relatively large project where we define case studies. We really base our project on the concepts of post-normal science and responsible research innovation and this idea of transdisciplinarity. Let me just give you an example of how this SDG cluster works. You have like a stakeholder who their action is farm salmon fed with locally produced microalgae feed. That is a specific activity. And you can see that there's specific targets that relate to the activity. For example, sustainable food production and resilient agriculture practices. This is target 2.4. Target 14.A, increased scientific knowledge and research in ocean health. And target 9.5, enhanced research and upgrade in industrial technologies. You could have a different stakeholder, for example, along the coast of Norway that's using drones. And you can, when you look at that activity, these targets emerge that are relative to the activity. And what you see is that this is across several SDGs, not just located in one. So I think that this is just a very logical argument being made when you start really working with the SDGs. You understand the power is in the targets. So one of the reasons that we want to do this is because we are also hypothesizing, or we see the need for local reports, because how the heck are we going to measure progress if we don't start having some sort of reporting system? So you can see how once they figure out what activity they're doing, well, they already know what they're doing. So it's just about mapping this out. And then every year reporting on the progress of this activity through the lenses of these targets. So we are collaborating, you'll hear from Brita after this, but Brita, when we went up to Svolvær in Lofoten, she told us about this amazing case in Andøya. So Andøya is an island in the, I guess you can see my mouse, but it is a fascinating island in Vesterålen, and here we are in northern Norway. So it's famous for its nature, famous for its space center. They launch rocket ships here for research. Famous for whale tourism, so to go out and see the whales. What we want to do, and this is getting a little bit to what Nils Tore was talking about Robert et al. On this idea of backcasting as well, because we have a vision of what we want. This is the Agenda 2030. And then working backwards, okay, well, we're here now. How do we take the steps to get there in the future? What we did is that we worked, I'm just anonymizing our stakeholders X, Y, and Z. We went through single stakeholder workshops where we had them identify all of these different targets, which one they thought was relevant, a very general thing. Do you think, for example, target 14.7 is relevant? Yes. We did these separately for X, Y, and Z. When we did that separately, then Anna and I are like, okay, listen, there's a lot of space of common relevance across these stakeholders who are on the same island. So this could be very interesting. So what we wanted to do then was to do a multi-stakeholder workshop using the backcast method. So the idea is here's 3 quite influential stakeholders on the island. They already have kind of a warm-up workshop by themselves, getting used to understanding what targets are relevant. And let's get them then in the same room. By the way, all of this was done in Zoom. We had some field work a year ago, like 2 months before the pandemic broke out, thank goodness. But now all of our stakeholder engagement is purely digital, which is working out really well. And we did this backcasting with this digital whiteboard where they could talk about the color coding is what the different stakeholders said in dialogue. So Anna and I were taking notes in real time as they're having this conversation. And so here you see our stakeholders, and you see that it was really easy for them to have this talk. It wasn't easy for them to have the targets in their head while they're talking. And I saw that as a really, really interesting aspect of the academic input needed, right? Because we were kind of translating this also in real time, the clusters. So what, I mean, yeah, basically we just go through this and you see after we get all this on the board, then there's a lot of work sorting out, okay, so what did they say and how was it related to which target? So, and this is blurry because you shouldn't be able to see it because it's again, it's really fresh, and so the stakeholders didn't want all of their conversation to be out there. But you can see and this is a bit of discourse analysis as well, which is, I think, really interesting from the social science side. You see in the gray on the left here, different statements, different quotes from the multi-stakeholder workshop. And then what Anna did was to use that statement and then click basically which targets are relevant to that statement. If they said, oh yeah, we should do this together. Okay, what does that mean? And then what we see then is when you go down here, we have a lot of these common targets with the 3 stakeholders. So you just see that when you take this extra step to take the conversation and translate it into these target clusters, you can see how the collaboration around the common targets could and should happen with the support, perhaps with the municipality, because the municipality hasn't been involved with these workshops yet. And that's the next step of our project, actually, is to include more stakeholders in this. After this prototype, I would consider it definitely a success, and the stakeholders also, I think, really liked it. So just going back and showing that the idea also, and this is very RRI, responsible research and innovation, this kind of feedback, that once we get reports going on, then we learn from those reports, we can feed back to the local activity and get more and more momentum. So you can check out our website. Zoe is doing a great job writing blog posts for us these days, and I'm sure we'll have like 100 blog posts after this conference. Also, we're getting a lot of fun input, and yeah, the conference is just beginning, so I look forward to that. I'm going to hand it over to Karen now, because Karen is going to talk about next steps that we also want to take.
Thank you, Dorothy. And thank you, Zoe, and all for your presentations. I've enjoyed this session very much, and I always learn a lot of new things as well, so thank you. Before we move on to my presentation and the more practical case study for reporting on the SDGs that we have prepared, I'd like to add a couple of questions and thoughts. How can we make the SDGs meaningful? Today, expectations are that public and private businesses incorporate the UN goals in their daily operations. But what does that mean for your business? We use sustainability as it is a new way of thinking. However, looking back, my experience is that previously we just used other words for the same thing. As part of my bachelor degree, for example, for more than 30 years ago, we built the sun catcher at the roof of the Institute of Physics at the University of Oslo, with running water on the surface that was heated up by the sun. Today, we would call it the sustainable energy solution. We called it physics applied to the energy challenges at that time. My professor couldn't offer me a master's degree in solar energy because there were none. Still, he built his new house based on our results with a big computer, a research-funded computer in his basement. Another example of how we use other terms today than previously is more personal. My parents grew up in the hard 30s, and we would wash and reuse plastic bags. And I learned to sew and repair my clothes and didn't wash them after only one day, as people normally do today. And my brother would say that we use the 5 kroner on both sides. It's a coin, a Norwegian coin. We were modest, and today we would maybe call it a sustainable way of living. A year ago, I had an interesting travel with the Alaska North project back to Alaska, where I have previously worked as a regulatory compliance manager. My colleagues were quite surprised to learn that nobody at all on the resource development conference referred to the SDG. None at all. In Norway, it was on everyone's lips and on their collar. But I know the Alaskans, and I know that they are very focused on environmental processes, but they use other terms for that. I believe that that's the case for many other many other places as well, and for smaller companies too. But even if they use other terms, they should still qualify for being sustainable. Don't you think so? How can we make it easier for these companies to report on the SDGs, especially the small, medium-sized businesses? And this is how I have hit off in the cooperation with Dorothy. It's building on past experiences and multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary, as Dorothy says, to develop better tools for the future. So now I'll share the screen. Share and presenter mode. This is actually the this sun catcher that we built on the roof of the University of Oslo, and it's important that we remember that many people around the world are working in a sustainable way or wish to work in a sustainable way, and this is what we will build on later in my presentation. How do we measure sustainability and what is business need? I'm cooperating with the University of Bergen in trying to find the best way to report compliance to 17 SDG goals and 169 targets. It seems like a very difficult task, but we need to compare apples with apples to be able to report progress, but also to compare between different project initiatives that are planned. It's important to avoid costly surprises as a business, and especially changes after you have already started the construction phase of a project. Because when you come into operations, you will bring in with you all the added costs if you have a lack of, or if you didn't do your early dialogue in the right way and need to make changes to adapt to the local communities. I'm working with Dorothy Dankel on developing an early dialogue with what we call a SDG wizard. It's questions that you want to ask your stakeholders and businesses, and she might share a bit about that later on. What type of competences do we need? We talk about multidisciplinarity. There's a word that's called tri-sector fluency. We need experts in government, in civil society, in business, but most of all, we also need some persons that have this fluency to understand and talk with all of these sectors. This might be a well-known slide for most of you. I'll run quickly through it. It's the Stockholm Resilience Center who spoke earlier today, who has made it. It's they just divide the sustainability goals in biosphere, what we live off, and society, and economic factors. And then you have this goal 17, which goes through all of these goals. The case study we're going to invite you to now is we're going to focus on the SDG 9, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and 11, sustainable cities and communities, and this 14, life below water. First of all, I need to mention that I've developed this tool with the support of Innovation Norway. I also had Kickstart funding from European Space Agency and partners. And we developed this tool initially as a stakeholder engagement tool. However, we found that the UN goals are ideal for this setup as well. Let's move on and dialogue. I'll give now. I'll invite Dorothy and Brita too. So maybe Zoe, could you introduce Brita too? This is a short notice change in the program. Could you take and introduce her quickly?
Yes, I sure can. A surprise appearance from Brita, who's a specialist in climate and sustainability strategies at SALT Consultancy working with climate risk planning and awareness in private and public sector.
I will use Dorothy and Brita as my stakeholders in this workshop. And the task to all of you listening is you are in the business of aquaculture, or you can find up any other business that you would like to be in. And your role is to, or task is to make a report on how your business complies with the UN goals. What approach would you choose? Which indicators would be relevant? And what does best describe how your company complies with the SDGs? And I'll head you on to goals 11, 9, and 14, because these are the examples we will use today. But please engage. If you sit in a room with different people, take the time to put down on a piece of paper what you would like to prioritize and how you would solve this. So how would you score sustainable use of the marine resources? That's target 14.7. And I'll choose to ask Dorothy if you can provide some comments to that.
Yeah.
Please.
Well, if I had an aquaculture company on the coast of Norway, it was to report on this target 14.7. I think that one of the first things I would think of would be, where do I source my feed? I think the salmon industry has a lot of, I mean, they have to feed their salmon. The whole point of salmon farming is so the salmon get big, and we need, marine quality oils, omega-3 oils in that feed, and that has to come from somewhere. So I would try to be able to trace my feed would be one of the main things I would do here.
Can
I add a little bit on to that, Karin?
Sure, Brita, go on.
Yeah, we did some risk analysis on climate change and how that would affect aquaculture industry in the north. And then I would also maybe, because the sustainable management of fisheries, which is a part of this goal, is really also to know that they are resilient over time. So including what water sources I have, how they will be affected of different kinds of climate scenarios, and also knowing that I can run a safe facility in the future. That also encompassing the coexistence aspects that a aquaculture industry would have in this area.
Just really quickly, also, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, most of our aquaculture in Norway is in the fjords and coastal zones. So just the use of the water that's running over the salmon is a use of a marine resource. And then, of course, the bottom fauna and all this. So there are actually a lot of different indicators for this target, especially when you take a systems view of this and cross-sectoral view, as Brita mentioned.
Thank you. I think that illustrates how we need to dialogue on the different targets to get the best results for reporting compliance to the goals. We'll move on to the next goal, which is the goal 9, and I've chosen target 9.1. And how well does available infrastructure support your business and the local community? And I've put a saying that in Norway, you say, ikke noe har så hastverk som en død fisk. And no one is in a hurry like a dead fish. So we need to have infrastructure and logistics in place for it to be fresh when it reaches the market. So should I start with Brita this time?
Yeah, again, I think a bit of like a materiality or what is relevant for the actor kind of insight. Looking here at the map, where is this, how is it located to this infrastructure, and how do we enable it to be safe, of high quality, reliable, and like knowing from North Nordic and North Norway perspective, the ability to get to sustainable options for the fisheries sector would be very relevant. We do not have electricity-based railways, for example, to the north of Norway. It's all run on diesel. So like really working in the long term on what kind of stakeholders we should include, and also how we can create a business model or a situation that is able to sustain and be sustainable for everyone around us over years.
Yeah, and I mean, this really came up very strongly in our multi-stakeholder workshop. When we did with our stakeholders in Andøya, infrastructure is absolutely key for Northern Norway. Actually, it's key for most of Norway. Well, for infrastructure is just key, right? And even when we see that the rural areas and the district areas of Norway, when they want to keep people there, they want to keep jobs, they want to expand, they want to have sustainable businesses, 100% dependent on infrastructure. So yeah, this is, I think, an easy target to get people talking and making demands and trying to measure progress. The question then is, how do you, for example, roads, they have to have roads. How do you make sustainable roads? I don't know. We need to have a workshop about this and talk with the local entrepreneurs, because yeah, I think this is a really essential target.
I'll also just joining that, because I think everything is related to behavior, right? And just a case from the north of Norway, we saw just during the pandemic start that the market for frozen fish, so usually Karen's saying is relevant. We fly our fish all over the world, but during the pandemic, restaurants closed. The use for fresh fish were lowered, and suddenly the producers had more time to get their stuff to the market. So all the time, one thing is looking at it in the status quo. We need roads, we need planes, we need this, but always go back and look at, okay, what kind of behavior is creating this, and is it also possible to change that behavior? So again, I think there's multiple interesting conversations coming out of this target.
Thank you. I could add also that this layout of the tool, we can add other questions or related to other targets. And we're working, Dorothy, maybe the time is to talk a bit about what we're calling the SDG wizard. And that's different questions that you could have for each target, or for, yeah, and it could be identified in a map or in a question bank. And then people could go through answering these relevant questions and sort out which target is relevant for them.
Yeah, I think for the time being, because we don't want to use too much time, because this is a really interesting project, but the idea of a meta infrastructure for Norway, where academics and businesses develop the questions that need to be asked in order to actually report on each target. That's it in a nutshell. And that this needs to be done in both an academic and a business setting, a very transdisciplinary setting, and to be updated, because we get new data, new technologies, basically by the day. But you need some sort of infrastructure so that everybody is contributing to these questions and everyone is answering the questions. So we're trying to develop that.
Yeah, and the importance of that is that it supports all the presenters earlier today who say that there's a need for agreed KPIs, and then it will be easier to ask the right questions. So I'll move on to the last or the next to last question, which relates to spatial planning. I've picked the target 11.3, which is how well does the spatial planning processes work, and how well are local stakeholders involved in public processes?
Yeah, this is also a key target. What we found is in our multi-stakeholder workshop, there were a lot of questions that the stakeholders themselves can't answer. It's the spatial planner who has to make some decisions, and they often came up say, we have to have these discussions with our spatial planners. So yeah, I think depending on the community, and maybe Helge can also comment on this, the relation of the sustainable development to the actual local spatial planner is really important.
We have 1 minute for you too, Britta.
I'll just, well, from a Norwegian perspective, since I see we have some questions in the chat that maybe see the kind of the stakeholder from another view. I guess in Norway we have the legal framework for PBL, planning and building, that really requires us to do stakeholder involvement and to have public processes on all kind of new projects. But I think there's still, even with that legal framework, there's a huge opportunity in using tools like this, tools that can enable democracy to deliver more precise information and to really involve more stakeholders, going beyond the hearing and the public scrutiny, really to get more insight to the project, because it will build better projects. So I think just more transparency here, and usually the builders see this, as, oh no, do we have to do this? But if we turn the coin and really see how much we can get out of well-designed processes that doesn't take time, but just gives you a lot of valuable feedback, I think there's a win-win from this one as well.
Thank you. And before I move to my last slide, I can comment that in Norway we also had a Statens Vegvesen, guidelines from the organization that for road building, which is well used in spatial planning. This is a bit busy slide, but it could show how, for example, Andøya kommune could address the goals of all their activities of, for example, the space center, the airport, there's the aquaculture and fish farm on land, they have a harbor, they have fishing, and maybe you could have a closing remark, Dorothy, before I move to this slide, because if projects fail, society pays. So let's do this right. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that this has been a really fun spin-off of our project, working with the interface, and I look forward to developing it further, but first doing more of these stakeholder workshops, getting more meat on the bone, and to see where that goes. I think this is it's really exciting, and I also Christina and Carlo, this is a fun time for us to also to engage, because I think there's just so many complementary aspects of our two projects. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Zoe,
I wonder how many times I'll start talking while muted. Hopefully not more than that. I was just saying, yes, thank you also for a lovely presentation. We're going to take a little quick impromptu question from fellow panelist Niels Tor on this topic, and then we'll get back to our discussants before the open question period.
Thank you. I love to also hear something from the people attending the webinar, but just one question. The most important stakeholder in all projects is actually nature, and it's asking nature, how would you produce fish in this area? And then see how is nature organized. And nature is not organized by accumulating one species in a very small area. And they say, let's create this koldtbord for all the other species. No, it's putting things a little bit around with diversity and stuff. So the question is, how can you actually include nature as a stakeholder in a tool like this, and not only look at the kind of human needs and human preferences in order to create value?
I think you just need to find the right targets. That is one of the basic baselines of Biosphere, and actually have a good question, good indicators on the topics that you raise. So we can talk later on that. Thank you.
I mean, I love that perspective, Ms. Tora, nature as a stakeholder. So yeah, that's, I mean, that's the way the world works. So yeah, but we could definitely do that. I mean, as Karen said, I think a lot of the targets are speaking for nature and just realizing that and not forgetting them. I mean, I have a target in front of me. Well, this is random 15.7 on poaching. I'm not sure if this, if we do, well, we used to maybe do polar bear poaching in Norway a long time ago, but yeah, there's a lot of things out there to protect biodiversity, and we need to recognize those and not just say, oh, it's not human related. It is, of course, all the SDGs are human related and nature.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. That's a very important and interesting point. Very, very interesting. We'll now get back to our regularly scheduled programming and hear a brief comment from Christian Wengen, who's a part of the UN Global Compact's Arctic Platform and Tinker as leader of the Creativity, Innovation and Sustainability.
Yeah, hi. I'm really, really happy to be able to talk a little bit more about how we can talk less and do more actions. That's great. And I really think that it is important to talk about this. And the SDGs are an enormously vast and complex endeavor. And many people then fall to the conclusion that then we need the big innovations. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that's very often wrong. Because the people that aren't talking that much, but are actually doing a lot, are the teachers, the health people, the managers of small and medium firms. And they don't talk that much about the SDGs. Many of them actually don't even know about the SDGs. And some of them don't really understand the term indicators. But these are the people doing the real work out there. These are the ones that are making our society run smoothly. And I'd like to talk a little bit about Stig, who makes fish cakes. And he makes fish cakes because he thinks that it's important that kids eat healthy. And obviously for him, he would never use, he's working in Finnmark, and he would never use fish from other places than Finnmark. He needs local fish. And when the mothers call him and say that their kids can't eat fish cakes because they're allergic to milk, he says, well, then I just make fish cakes without milk. I can make fish cakes without everything except fish. That's the grocery stores, the chains, the big chains, they are making the fish cakes without the fish. So he's very focused on the SDGs, but he doesn't call it the SDGs. So he says, as Karin said, he doesn't use these words. He's talking about social responsibility, developing the community. And you can imagine when we talk with health workers in Uganda, with Harriet that works in the local hospital, she doesn't talk about the SDGs as well, right? And she doesn't know the indicators. But the point is that she's part of the solution. Stig and Harriet are one of the main actors as part of the solutions. And then I would like to focus on a specific term, since I'm going to talk a little bit about innovation, and that's frugal innovation. It's a term that not that many know. Frugal innovation means reducing the complexity and costs of innovations. Is rather than making the great grand innovation, is to make the small, easy, accessible innovation, the ones that are actually having impact. And I think that when we are talking about the SDGs, it's important for us as well to think about the SDG as an innovation and think about it in a frugal way. See, how can we reduce the complexity and the costs of working with the SDGs? That's when we are going to have some really, really great impact. And I think this is a start, and I think that the work that Karin and Dorothy has done is a very good beginning, but I think we have a long way to go, and I think it's a very important job to do. So let's do it and not only talk about it.
Thank you so much. That line, I'm going to talk more about how to talk less. I like that, and I wish I'd come up with it. We'll now hear from Brita again, who I have already introduced, so we'll just give you the mic.
Yeah, thank you all, and thanks for being here. I'll reflect back a little bit on my expertise. So I sit in a consultancy called SALT that looks at ocean health and coastal development. So one of our expertise areas is future fit coastal societies. And with that, we've looked into a lot of what is happening with SDGs. I've previously been head of sustainability for Nordic and global brands, so I've obviously worked a lot in this space, and I was super happy to get the SDGs when we got them, knowing that finally we have a global framework telling us what to do when, and even giving us a deadline. But I think I've seen over the process of working with localization in municipalities, and I think that's also reflected by the research that and the reports and the evaluation that finds place in this area, that we are spending too much time. We're making this a heavy burden on a lot of the small municipalities that are equipped in time and capacity to really handle these things, and it really reflects back on a lot of the issues that these municipalities are meeting. Also in terms of adapting and building resilience to climate change. So I think for my sake, a lot of this needs to be we need to equip them with better tools. We need to bring materiality that the private sector is using when they really focus on this onto the agenda, and really stop wasting time, because a lot of these processes have been taking way too much time, and we need to get up to speed. And one of the frameworks I like for that is really the Stockholm Resilience Center that a lot of you have put up already, and also what is reflected by Carlos' pitch, that climate action really comes into core, because it is really the 4 goals at the bottom of the Stockholm Resilience Center's model is an enabler for everything that we really do. So I would love to see us getting to where we both have clearer requirements from our government, better help to the municipalities to actually make this localization happen, and enable us to take these pins off our sleeves and off our jackets and actually put them into action. Because right now I see way too many soccer balls flying around without really producing results. So I think I'll really reflect back to also that that the Future is Now report that came in 2019, that really tells us that we only have this limited time ahead of us, and the future was actually now 2 years ago. So we need to get to action and really become more material on these issues and focus on what's at stake for each and little municipality with the capacity that they have.
Thank you, Britta. I just want to say to everybody, thank you for sticking with us. I've been watching the number of participants, and we have been very constant. So you have everybody's rapt attention, and thank you guys for sitting with us wherever you are today. We're going to get to some of your questions. Many of them have been answered via text or by a number of comments or by presentations that have come up afterwards. But I see one here from Camilla Bratland that I think is particularly interesting, given how many of our viewers are early career scientists and academics. Her question is, have you discussed in Bolmo, for instance, of defining how much of the land use should be dedicated to green structures, green mobility, health objectives, etc.? Or what do politicians discuss? I think that's a great question to have on the table for those of us who aren't at that table.
Shall I answer that? The thing is that the short answer is no. And I may complete that with saying no. There is a discussion. First, we have to agree upon, and it sounds horrible, that we actually want to preserve something. Yes, there are many local politicians who say yes, it's important to preserve nature. It's we need to value our coastal culture, landscape, etc. But and that but is quite large. In the work, for the time being, we are working at the land use part of the municipal master plan, and we are spending a whole lot of energy, or they are spending a whole lot of energy of discussing where they can build their own, where we can continue to build nose. There's no English term for it. It's a boathouse or sea houses in the coastal line, and they are very focused on landowners. Now we need to change that to be more focus not on just landowners, but on inhabitants. It's much better to say that Norwegian, because you can say you have to be turned from utbyggerfokusert to innbyggerfokusert. Locally, that is what's taking the majority of the political discussion. We do have some significant landscape areas. Some of it are preserved, nationally protected, but we haven't discussed like on square meters. On how much we want to preserve, how can we do, what land use may be used for like new industry or new infrastructure, etc., etc. But we have a local political decision that in this period until 2023, we are going to introduce a what you call the accountants of land use, arealregnskap. And then we have to make that discussion, but we are not there yet. That we are down to exact measures of how much of this and how much of that. No.
Would anybody else like to comment on that?
I can also comment a little bit, because I think this is truly also a need here for the municipality to actually define a true sustainable future vision for the county, and then afterwards have a honestly reference to see where are we at the moment, and then mobilize both politicians, businesses, and inhabitants to find out how do we get from where we are to where we are going. And at least then you know that you're heading in the right direction. The other alternative, which is the most common strategy today in most organizations and municipalities, is asking, how can we become less bad? And I mean, less bad isn't enough at this moment. Cutting emission isn't enough. We need to restore ecosystems. We need to capture CO2 from the atmosphere. We need to get species into situations where we create conditions conducive to life. And that is very different to how kind of processes are happening around, where everybody is kind of thinking, how can I get more of the cake, instead of actually asking, how can we create more value for all living species in this area? And it's extremely interesting to see the results from the Norwegian Marine Research Institute from last summer, where they were reporting about the development of lobster and the claws, size of claws, in the areas where they said we protect this area against fishing lobster. Suddenly you actually get better conditions for lobster to develop, and you also then get a much more interesting species to harvest outside the area which is protected. And this is the way we need to kind of start reinventing our understanding of the surroundings and seeing how we actually promote nature to grow and not only consume nature.
How do we bake a bigger cake? I have another question here. We just have a few minutes left, but I think this is an important question from Svein Gunnar Schjoten. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. I'm working on Norwegian. It's very challenging. He says, thank you for a very interesting workshop. His question is, considering the histories and path-dependent processes that are always present in local industries and municipalities, for example, how do you see this methodology or toolbox being able to navigate these tensions or dilemmas?
That is a very good question, because you can't only keep focusing on the businesses that exist today, but you have to open up for future development and new evaluation of each company. So this can also be fixed by each company finding out what is the true value also for nature for our activity before they actually start lobbying and trying to influence the understanding of what is sustainable or not. Norwegians have been using so much time on trying to avoid getting in balance with nature and try to press the European Union not to make directives of water or now the EU taxonomy, instead of just saying, okay, let's get this shit done and become a part of nature and create true values instead of false values.
I think it's a great question, and I believe that stakeholder engagement, public engagement is really important, and We might not be able to fix the system and foresee all the problems, but with better tools, and I think I believe that the young generation coming into this area expect tools to be in place, and the processes today are too traditional, and I believe that we need to think differently. It might not be found up the best way, but I think I really believe that we need more dialogue, but we need constructive dialogue, and we need KPIs and questions. Thank you.
Perfect. That brings us to the end of our time. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really wonderful. There's now a half-hour break. So get a new cup of tea, and the next sessions start at 3:30. For those of you who would like to continue to have this discussion, which I think is very rousing, please meet in Coffee Corner Meeting Room 4. It's a great opportunity to take advantage of all the social networking tools. So meet new people and let's keep chatting. See you soon and have a great
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone who attended. We can't see you, but we can feel you.
Yeah. Okay, bye.